It seems like everybody knows that books are good for them, yet nobody seems to be reading. We're all told that it's the right thing to do and that it makes you smarter, blah, 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 but we still never do it. And myself a year ago was doing the exact same thing. And in the year between then and now, I've read over 25 books, and I can actually attest that it does make a difference in your life, and it will change so many things in a positive way for you if you start reading. I don't tend to think I'm particularly good at reading. I was never in any of the higher reading classes. I never thought of myself as someone who was good at reading. And I was always the person who I did my reading assignments, and I never really liked to do too much extra reading on my own. I've read a couple books here and there, but really nothing crazy. So probably the last book I read was sophomore year of high school up until about a year ago, where I finally decided I was going to at least give it a try and see what all of the fuss was about on why reading was actually good for you. And clearly I found something big, because in that year I've read over 25 books. I am a living testament that even if you haven't read in absolutely years, the difference of just a couple books in your life is going to be massive in how you work and how your brain works. When I first started reading books again, I struggled to really find time. My major excuse was I just simply don't have time to be reading. And this excuse is pretty funny to me in hindsight, because while I thought I had no time at all, I realized that as soon as I replaced the scrolling before bed, you just lay down in bed and all of a sudden you spend hours on Instagram Reels, or you're watching YouTube videos. And that was the first thing I had to realize, that I actually did have the time to dedicate to reading, but I was spending it on things that were wasting my time. And so if you can simply just cut down on the amount of time you spend scrolling, or better yet, replace entirely the amount of time you spend scrolling with actually opening up a book that's, I find to actually be a lot more intricate and interesting than any content you can consume online, then you're going to be in a much better spot. But I don't want this video to focus on how to start reading again. I actually wanted to focus on the benefits that I've found over this past year in starting to read. And these reasons are purely anecdotal. I'm not gonna come at you and say what are the scientifically best benefits of reading, but I do wanna start with that. I feel like I am a lot less stressed. I feel like the amount of time that I spend reading now really helps me calm my mind down. I am a pretty ADHD person, so I tend to have a lot of racing thoughts and running around. I feel like when I pick up a book and read for, even if it's just 5 to 10 minutes at a time, I feel like I really do slow down and I feel a lot better afterwards. And this is something that I think with things like social media and just how fast day-to-day life is now for so many people, I think the reading is a great way to help you just slow down a little bit and actually take time to just be in the moment and enjoy a story that has often a lot more payoffs than I would have ever thought. And I am not the guy who I would have thought I would have been making a video about reading books. I don't think I fit into your standard category for someone who reads books, but I realize that now that category doesn't actually exist. That was something that when I was far younger, I used to think only a certain type of person could read books well. No matter what the age or background of who you are watching this video right now, any person can and should be reading more books. And I think with that reduction in stress as a byproduct, I'm not gonna say reading helps you, sleep better or anything like that, because I don't wanna make false claims, but I feel like when I replaced that scrolling with reading before bed, I calmed myself down a lot faster. I found it a lot easier to fall asleep and then stay asleep, which I feel like nobody has really told me about when they were like, reading is good for you. They kind of mention other benefits, but I think that's one that's worth mentioning, that it just really helps you actually fall asleep. And that's, of course, if you're reading at night. That's normally when I read. I think that's the easiest time to fit in reading, especially if you're new to it. You can find 10 minutes at the end of your day, instead of being on your phone, simply picking up a book. And I would also say, don't start with like a super hard book. Start with something that you feel like is actually going to be achievable. Basically what I'm saying is, don't start reading again on some massive novel thinking you're gonna take down the hardest of the hard books. There are plenty of books out there, and reading should, number one, overall be fun. And when these books are fun, you continue to just keep reading, and over time, I feel like organically, you are going to find that you can read harder books. And with those harder books comes another benefit that I want to talk about, which is I feel like I really have an improved vocabulary. I feel like you learn a lot of words, and unless you're purposely trying to learn new words every single day, there is no better organic way that I've found to actually learn new words and in a way that is fun and not so challenging, where you're going to sound more intelligent, you might even feel more intelligent. I'm not saying that books are going to make you smarter, but I do think they change a little bit about how your brain works and how it functions, especially when it comes to word recognition and how you use and articulate your sentences. And on top of just new words, I find that books also can provide you new perspectives on people, because these authors come from very, very different walks of life from you, and some have been dead for 100 years, some are 80 years old right now, some didn't speak English as their first language, and all of those different perspectives I find give you a very unique writing style. When you read it, you can actually start to see how they've woven their own stories of their life and their own experiences into this novel. Written literature has a very interesting way of being, absorbed into the human brain, and like when you hear something versus when you read something with your eyes, you're going to absorb different amounts of information. I just feel like stories that are told in books really resonate in the written format. Another thing that I think is pretty useful for almost anyone watching this, especially again going back to how fast our world is, I feel like because of the books that I've read, I have a greater amount of patience. So I think in the world today there's a lot of like now, and everyone wants the newest and the fastest right now, and reading forces you to slow down and read one word at a time, which at first, I'm not gonna lie, can be difficult, but over time it gets so much easier. And this reading, I feel like you develop greater patience because reading inherently just takes longer than a 60-second short or a 15-minute YouTube video, whatever this ends up being. And with this patience comes a whole other array of benefits, I feel like. Number one being your memory. I feel like my memory is a lot sharper, and I don't know why exactly this is, but I did just look it up. And it actually is another fact that it actually has been studied. And I know I said I wasn't going to put studies at you, but I'm just saying anecdotally, this one is backed up by science, and that you have a much sharper memory. And each time you recall a detail from the story, when you pick the book back up again, you're actually also strengthening your abilities to remember other things in your day-to-day life too. But with this better memory comes a boosted concentration, and I feel like it's a lot easier to stay in the moment on things and be present in a world full of all the online notifications and the endless rabbit holes. It is much easier to focus on one thing at a time. It's like, when you're trying to get an assignment done for class and you just cannot seem to focus and do it, you keep getting distracted by this or that, and it's causing you a lot of stress from the procrastination it causes. Well, I am happy to say that, maybe not directly as a part of reading, maybe I've also just gotten a little bit older, but I would attest it a lot to reading, because I feel like I noticed it alongside the better I got at reading, the easier this was for me to actually sit down and just finish an assignment. Which is pretty cool if you ask me, because it's just making your life easier by having a trade-off of, putting down your phone and picking up a book, which is very fascinating, and you get all these other benefits along the way too, of it's actually also very entertaining. Once you start to enjoy the process of reading, it doesn't become so burdensome, because those first couple times back, it may be pretty difficult, but it gets so much easier very fast that pretty soon you don't even have to think about the effort of reading. It becomes effortless. And then you can really get involved in a lot of really cool stories. I find those really cool stories serve as a pretty good way to actually lower stress too. When you have a lot of things that you have to do in a day, then if you can just sit down, read a book for a little bit, I feel like your stress gets a lot lower. And I've noticed this personally. I think of myself as a higher stress person. I feel like reading really helps me afterwards. I know I touched on that a little bit earlier, but I do want to reiterate that it's like that focus and that concentration. It's kind of like, it's hard to describe. I'm not saying you really do get like just inherently smarter. Like, I don't think your IQ changes, but I think the way in which your brain processes information and the way in which it completes tasks becomes a lot different for the better when you start to read. Especially if you can get into the habit of reading every single day, I think these benefits become exponentially greater. But when you really think about the trade-off between scrolling at night or, wasting your time on a video game, don't get me wrong, video games can be a lot of fun, but I just think that when it comes to something like reading, the trade-off is so great. And considering a book, like you see, I have all of these books behind me here. Now, I haven't read all of them. They're about half read, half not, but I got some that I wanted to read over the course of this year, and I've just, I've been reading. I keep buying books that I'm outpacing myself in what I can read. So I'm done buying books for a little bit, but these are, as you can see, are a sneak peek into my next ones. I don't think it really matters what you read. I would read something that you think is going to be entertaining. So don't start with some business nonfiction book about, buying and selling businesses unless that's really, really interesting to you. But for most people, it's like reading that really academic stuff is going to turn them off from reading because it reminds them of school. And I think school turned a lot of us off of reading. But the reality is that reading is fun and reading is something that is really good for you, except nobody's doing it these days. You know what I'm saying? I just don't see the people read. I think it's making a resurgence. Whenever I go to the gym, I see all the people on the treadmills like reading their books. Like, I think that's also another really good time to get your reading in. That's not for me personally, because I'm never just like walking on the treadmill so much, but I think that is another great area. It's like, if you can just find these little micro pockets of time to just fit it in, if you pick one time every day to read, you'd be surprised how fast you get your books done. And like I said, so 25 books over the past year, and that was like pretty, like, I was not reading any like large amount per day. I think I was reading maybe 20 minutes a day, and I didn't start like that. It was like some days I had only 5 minutes and some days I had like an hour if I really had that time before bed to just sit down and read the book. And I find that it's, once you really get into a book too, you tend to get a lot more enthralled and you can actually read so much faster. You would be shocked at how much faster you can comprehend literature when you start doing it every day. And that rolls over into all things. Your comprehension just goes crazy. Like, it's not a superpower. It's far from it, but it's so much easier to retain information. So if you think that you struggle to retain things and you find yourself very forgetful, I'm a super forgetful person. I think I'm probably the worst one at it that I know. But if you can sit down and read, I think it's also going to improve. And that goes into the memory thing too. But ultimately, I really think that reading is something that everybody should be getting back into if you kind of fell out of it, and whether you're only a person who read in high school or middle school for assignments, or if you're a full-grown adult in the working world, I think there's a benefit for anybody. In college, I think it also helps me slow down, where it's like if I just take a couple minutes to read when I can throughout the day, it is so much easier to get my other college assignments done, because college is a lot, same as any education, same as any trade, any job. Every life is a lot of work, and I think reading helps you deal with that in a much more effective way that actually has long-term results. And it's not overnight that you'll notice all of these changes, but if you give it a couple months, I think you'll start to notice how much easier it is to read. And I think it's also pretty rewarding when you can look back at the catalog of books you've read. Like apps like Goodread, obviously this is not sponsored, but I think apps like Goodread are really useful. I have Goodreads, and it can give me some book recommendations, and I can also just log the books that I've read or I'm currently reading, and it can keep your page number for you, which is really cool. And I don't think if you're going to read, you could totally take advantage of the audiobooks, or you could take advantage of ebooks. I prefer physical books because once I buy it, I own it, and I really like that concept. I think reading is honestly one of the most powerful ways to keep your mind engaged and active, and I can promise you, you will feel sharper over time. It's hard to articulate exactly what that feeling is, but I'm sure anybody who has been reading pretty actively and is watching this video could attest in the comments. And anybody who maybe is inspired by this video to start reading, come back in a couple months and let me know what you think, and I'm positive you will have something to say about how much easier it is to remember things, get tasks done. It just helps with all of that so much. So if you feel like you've been struggling with that, maybe the answer is not some crazy productivity hack. Maybe it's not watching yet another YouTube video about how to be productive, and buying these courses on how to get stuff done and watching these motivational videos. Maybe it's just acknowledging that you might be living an overstimulated life, and so the answer to that could be slow down, get less stimulation, read a book. A lot of the most successful people claim that they read, and I'm not saying that reading leads to success, but I think reading opens up a pathway to where your mind actually has time to process and think and slow down, which I think is absolutely crucial for making intelligent decisions about your future. And when you pick up that book, you're not just picking up the book to read a word. You don't just grab this book to open it up and think, how many pages can I get done? You go into a book thinking that you're just trying to get a page done and a page done and a page done. There's no point. There's no point, because you're not actually reading to read, you're reading to feel productive, and that is kind of counterintuitive, which can be tough the first couple of times. So don't get yourself down if you find yourself focusing on the word and not the bigger story, because it comes with time. I think almost the entire first book I read was kind of like this, where I was trying to read page to page, and so I give you that little tip of probably don't do that over time, but I think it'll alleviate, because it did for me, and I know it will for you. If you're consistent, your brain will start to understand the bigger picture when you read these stories, which is one of the most rewarding things, when you can actually get to that point where you're understanding a story. You're not just reading word to word, because it can be tough, and reading is a skill. It's not something that everyone just is instantly good at. It's something that you have to take time to do, and then the benefits come with it later on. So to wrap up here, in a world that's full of constant distractions and everything trying to absorb your attention, at least put that attention into something that is going to respect your time and actually give you value back. So nothing earth-shattering left to say, to be honest with you. Ultimately, it's that reading makes your brain stronger, and with that comes a lot of benefits that honestly are very overlooked. And I honestly, a year ago, I would have had no idea that there would have been all these benefits, but that's why I'm making this video, because I felt so compelled to actually get up and talk about it on my platform, so that hopefully at least one person who watches this video will start reading, and I promise you it will make a positive difference on your life. So if you're still here, then the question is, are you gonna start reading? Make that resolution, buy that book, purchase it on Amazon. The books are pretty cheap over there. Go to your local bookstore, ask a friend for a book, find a book around your house. You probably have one. Books are absolutely everywhere. Buy something that you think is going to be interesting if you are going to buy a book, but if it's something you already have, choose something that is an appropriate size for you. Whatever that means. If you think that's 100 pages, then go for 100 pages. If you think it's 50 pages, do that. If you think it's 400 pages, go for it. Reading is more about the journey and the experience of reading those stories than just getting the biggest book done or getting the most intelligent book read. Reading should be fun, and keep it like that, because I think a lot of us, when we were taught about reading, it was always for assignments in school, and that takes all of the fun out of reading, when it should be something that is fulfilling for you. So if you haven't decided what you want to read yet, I do have a video here that ranks all of those 25 books that I read last year, and it is going to be a very diverse list that I think you'll find at least something you'll like, so consider clicking on that video. Anyways, like, subscribe, or don't. Thanks, y'all.